This is episode 154, The Second Mountain, Climbing to a More Meaningful Life. Welcome to Alive by Design. My name is Blake Mallon, and we're here to bring you inspiring people, principles, and practices to help you wake up, move toward your meant to, and feel fully alive. Open your mind and let's dive in. Hey guys, before you listen to the podcast, I just want to drop in and say I appreciate you for being here, and I'm super excited about this new Walk With Me series. These are solo episodes where I take some time in the middle of my morning run through the Santa Monica Mountains to share some inspired ideas and thoughts on my mind and heart. If you want to join me for any of these conversations live, you can catch me many mornings on my Facebook page, facebook.com/BlakeMallon.page. Would love to see you there. Love you guys. Enjoy the episode. Walk with me. The Second Mountain. That was the topic of a recent conversation I found myself in. I was in a mastermind, a little private, casual huddle, if you will, with a bunch of just really inspiring entrepreneurs, all CEOs and owners of their own companies, large companies. What made the conversation super interesting is all of us were from totally different categories or industries, totally different types of businesses. I was the only one in the circle that have spent my career in community-based marketing, and it was just an interesting dialogue as this kind of analogy naturally emerged of the second mountain. And I use the term analogy because I know I'm in the middle of hiking a mountain right now. But I'm not talking about the physical mountains we may be walking up on the weekends. But the second mountain when it comes to our life's ambitions. And it was so interesting because everybody in that specific circle felt kind of the same feeling that we have all climbed what we'll call our first mountain in life. And there was just something that felt inherently different, like totally different, about this concept of a second mountain. And I want to talk about this feeling and some of the insights that just came to my mind through my own experiences we were sharing, and I've had a chance to digest and share it all with you. And I think it'll be super applicable to every one of you out there, regardless of what mountain you're on right now. If you're in the middle of your first ascent, you're finding yourself on the second mountain, you didn't even know what to call it, but maybe this helps you put language around the feeling or the circumstance you're in. Or maybe you're in the valley in between, and this will help create some clarity. But it was super valuable and inspiring for me, and I want to share just some thoughts with all of you on the second mountain. So I think the analogy came from a book that when I was sitting in the circle, someone shared. They're like, Blake, have you ever read The Second Mountain? I was like, no, we were sharing experiences. He's like, what you're talking about, he kind of describes. And so I recently went through the book on audio. Thought it was really good. You guys can check it out. The Second Mountain, find it on Audible. But I'm going to carry it beyond just the lessons in the book. I think the book does a great job of describing the analogy. I don't want to add my own layer of thoughts, really just perspective from my own experience in today's conversation. And I think to talk about the second mountain, we got to first explain the first mountain. And what I mean by mountain is whatever you're climbing in your life, whatever your desire is pushing you toward, whatever your ambition is driving you forward. And yes, that can mean business or work, career, income, money, finance, success. All those things are definitely a part of a first mountain. It doesn't have to be limited to that, though. For many people, a first mountain can be a totally different category. I mean, how many, athletes spend a first part of their life pursuing a specific sport, or people that fall in love with a certain skill that spend their life mastering a certain skill. Some people, their first mountain is purely academics, like they spend their first mountain learning, right? Mastering a certain topic. So I don't want anybody to feel like this conversation is limiting to a business dialogue, although it's obviously relevant. But for any topic. Morning. And I want you to think about, if I were to ask you, wherever you're, I know we have different ages from all over the world, like, what was your first mountain? The thing that you were driven to climb, to get better, to master, to get to the top of, to conquer, to achieve. What was it? Or to reframe for some of y'all, what is it? If you're still finding yourself on that mountain today, which is perfectly fine. And I want us to think about what drives most people toward and up most of our first mountains. And I'm just going to share from not only personal perspective, but obviously working with a lot of entrepreneurs. I mean, it's crazy to even say, but like literally hundreds of thousands of people over 23 years. It just creates a perspective. That's it. And I guess if there is one thing I'm pretty decent at, it's recognizing patterns or connecting dots and just observing, learning, being curious, and drawing out things that kind of seem to go together. And I found some consistencies in these first mountain ascents. A lot of times what drives people toward and up our first mountain is what I call the script. And for those of you guys that have followed me for any period of time, you know I'm passionate about the topic of the script, or another way to define it, are supposed to, right? The prescription we're all given as a part of life on how to live life and what to do. And not just the how to go to school and get good grades, to go to more school, to get good grades, to get a good job, to work the ladder, to follow the rules, right? To get married, have the kids, buy the house, all the life script stuff that I found is universal, transcends country, language, culture. But it goes deeper than just, that script, all the scripts of what we feel we're supposed to do. And I'm not going to get into a whole narrative on that. Find some of our previous conversations or go watch my TED Talk, TED.com, to search my name. You can go deeper on the script concept. But the script that's supposed to is something that drives so many people for their first mountain, right? What we think we're supposed to do, trying to meet a societal standard, trying to appease the expectations of our parents or our teachers or people we look up to, or this identity that media and marketing somehow create in our mind of who we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to act, what we're supposed to think, how we're supposed to live. This supposed to drive so many of us. It drove me through my first mountain. And I find that to be a consistent theme of people chasing this supposed to that moves them forward. Beyond the script, another pattern I've seen in so many achievers, a lot of times high achievers, I'll call it the chip. And what I mean by the chip is a chip on the shoulder. We all know what it means to have a chip on the shoulder. How many of you guys have met someone who has a chip on their shoulder all the time? A chip on your shoulder is something to prove, right? Something to prove that is visceral, something to prove that is so deeply rooted it taps into a lot of times an anger, right? Or a hatred or a feeling that fires somebody up. And although it may be derived from kind of a negative energy, it is a power source or fuel source. And a lot of times a chip on a shoulder can move people up a mountain. Something to prove because of something that happened in their childhood or their parents or their household, or, who knows what specific event in someone's lifeline can create that moment where there's a perpetual chip that they feel like they need to show the world who they are and what they're capable of. Powerful drivers, don't get me wrong, both of these, a script and chasing supposed to, a chip and something to prove to others, are powerful drivers. And those help a lot of people run up the first mountains in life. I'm sure as I'm saying all of this, you may be can relate to some seasons in your life where you maybe had one or both of those, or maybe there's people that come into your mind that you can say they're chasing the script, or they're the one with the chip. They're powerful drivers. It's interesting if you look at both of those, the fuel source, the energy, the power comes from a lens or a perspective of what others think. Isn't that interesting? When we're chasing supposed to, we're moving toward an identity that others have defined us. When we have a chip on our shoulder, we're running in a direction to prove others wrong. Both those fuel sources are direct connection to people outside us. A lot of times First Mountains, if I were to continue on kind of patterns, a lot of times First Mountains, they are driven by, call it an ego, call it a need for significance, right? Especially achievers out there. And there's nothing wrong with these words. Don't get me, misunderstood. There's nothing wrong with an ego or a need for significance moving you forward, right? All of us, if we're honest with ourselves, right? Many of us have that need, that desire, right? It's something that feels good. We want to feel enough. And a lot of times it's driven by an ego, right? Or a need, right, for that significance. If you turn the coin the other direction, always on the other side of ego, when you really look at it, right, or significance, if you flip that coin over, you'll find a lot of that times it's masking insecurity, right? A self-doubt or an insecurity that maybe we're not enough, that we're not being enough, right? If you go real deeper and you go into the psychology realm, it's, a need for love. Isn't it funny that sometimes the things we looked at as the highest confidence, highest ego, highest self-assurance, right, highest significance, a lot of times if you flip it around, it's really an insecurity masked. But don't misunderstand me. It's effective. It can be effective, right? It can move people up a mountain, right, and get people to achieve and to overcome and to create when it comes to a first mountain. But driven by those energies a lot of the times. A lot of times the desired outcome of first mountains have to do with things. We're taught at young ages in the personal growth space to have a dream board, create a vision board. What are the things that you want, right? All the way back to Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, right? Defining your burning desire statement. And a lot of times when we do that in our first mountain, it comes down to certain tangible things, right? It might be the house we want to buy, or the mortgage we want to pay off, or the watch we want to have on our wrist, or the purse on our shoulder, or the shoes on our feet, the car that we're driving, the places that we're going, the address that we live in. And there's nothing wrong with all of those things. There's nothing wrong with all of that. I was driven by many of those things up my first mountain. And I think most people are. So it's interesting when you look at a first mountain and the things that are common, and there's nothing wrong with any of this. I'm saying all of this, and if it's resonating, right, it's not because I'm calling you out, it's because it's just the truth for most people, right? For most of us, all of this or some of this. Then I think if you were to go look at what is driving you up your first mountain, I bet some of these things are true for you. And there might be others, right? If you put the mirror back on your own self on that first mountain you were thinking about, what are the reasons why you had that desire and ambition? What is the energy that you pulled from that drove you forward? What was the outcome, right? The end in mind that you wanted, the goal that you had that moved you, right? Be honest with yourself. And you have different opinions, please share below. I'd love the perspective. I'm just sharing my experience of common themes that I've seen. And all of that works. It can work. It works to move you up a first mountain. But this conversation I started with the second mountain. And that was the dialogue I was having with this interesting, inspiring group of entrepreneurs, is a second mountain is different. A second mountain feels different. A second mountain is about everything different. And it's just crazy because I think every one of us transition in our life to a second mountain. And it happens at different times, right? I don't think it's an age thing. I think it's a experience of life thing, right? Some people experience more life at young ages. Some people experience, right, less life at young ages. I think it's a season of life thing Now, because it comes with experience and a little bit of wisdom and a certain amount of life, it maybe falls generally within late 30s, 40s for sure, maybe into someone's 50s, right? It's different for all of us. There's no right or wrong time. But I think somewhere in that timeline, all of us find ourselves shifting into a second mountain. And it doesn't mean you had to achieve the first. If you achieved or conquered or mastered or got a result that you wanted on that first mountain, you got to the top of the mountain. Congratulations. Right? Many of you have gotten to the top of a first mountain in your life. And again, it might not be everything you always wanted, but if you look at where you started and where you ended up, you conquered a mountain. You scaled a mountain in your business, in your work, in your career. Maybe in a skill set, maybe in a sport, maybe in athletic, maybe in an art, maybe in something creative, maybe in relationships, maybe with your family, maybe with being a parent, whatever your mountain was. You got to a certain part. You scaled a mountain. You got your first mountain. And there's a natural transition from when you get to the top of a mountain where now you got to realize, well, you get to the top of a mountain, you think it's the end, but all you realize is that's just the top of the first mountain. And the only thing you see when you're out there after you celebrate is, well, there's another mountain. Or maybe you don't get to the top, but you've spent your life climbing and maybe the feeling has changed. Maybe you've been climbing the mountain and you've gotten a certain way up, but for some reason the feeling is different than when you started. And it might be that you need to change mountains. It might be it's time to start a different mountain. It's time to shift to a second mountain. You have gotten to the place you were meant to get to. You've reached the elevation that was created for you. It might not be the point you thought you'd get to when you started, but it's the point you were meant to get to when you did. It's a feeling you can shift. And at some point, I think there's a shift, regardless of how high you got up or it was where you thought you would be when you started. There's a shift to a second mountain. And the second mountain is different. Where the first mountain was really driven by perspective of others, a script you were following, a chip you were proving wrong. I think a second mountain comes with an awareness of who you really are, what you were really created for, the gifts you really have, the things that are really meant for you. It's much more about you being you and learning, and not only learning, but living and being who you were created to be. It's a lens of you and your perspective based on what you really feel and what's right for you, not what you think others think you should do. It's a pure lens looking through without the filter of a perception of others. And I think that comes with a certain season of life and a coming of age and an amount of experience where you start to realize who you are and you stop filtering yourself based on the perspective of others. And I think a second mountain is about you being you and growing into what you were created for and taking all your collective experience and your trial and error and yes, your victories, but also your mistakes and the things you've messed up, all of the things that have shaped you into who you are, made you aware of who you are. Now, being and living that person, I think, is the beginning of a second mountain. No longer through the lens of a script. No longer through the energy of a chip. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't about them. It's about you. So it's a different desire. The ego and significance or insecurity that powers the first mountain has shifted. It's shifted. A second mountain has a lot more humility. A second mountain has a lot more transparency. That transparency is a buzzword today. Transparency it's just honesty. What is transparency? It's honesty. It's truth, right? It's being and living your authentic self. That's what transparency is. So the energy is no longer about an ego or a self-assurance, right? But much more about a humility. The first mountain is a lot about achievement, right? It's about achievement and achieving. The second mountain, it's more about fulfillment. You know, Tony Robbins has a really famous quote. It's one that always hits hard where he says, achievement without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. Achievement without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. In other words, if you just spend your life on the first mountain, achieve, but you don't make the transition to what actually fulfills you, doesn't matter how high you climb, what you accumulate, what you have, it's the ultimate failure. If the first mountain's about achievement, the second mountain's about fulfillment, right? What fills you up? What fills your cup? What lights you up? What makes you feel alive is the second mountain. If the first mountain's about the accumulation of things, right, what you can get, I think the second mountain is more about what you can give. It's less about accumulation and more about contribution. It's less about receiving and what you can get and more about giving and what you can give. A second mountain's more about contribution and an impact that you're able to make. And that impact, it doesn't have to be every single person on planet Earth. Some of you may aspire for that, and God bless you, but that impact may be the impact in your household, the impact on your kids, the impact on your neighbors or community or school or an organization you're passionate about, or your parents or your family or a business or a community or colleagues or coworkers. But it's a shift in perspective about a contribution or impact to others. Where the first mountain is about self, maybe the second mountain is more selfless. Might be more about impact or legacy. It feels different. And it feels different because it is different. And it's interesting because I think these two mountains are something we all go through in our life in different ways, right? At different times. But you guys tell me if what I'm saying resonates, makes sense, if you can feel the difference in mountains. Maybe you're on the first mountain and this is foresight or foreshadowing for you, and that's okay, right? Maybe you're on the first mountain and you felt that it's not the mountain you're meant to be climbing anymore, and that you're resistant as to why. And maybe this is giving clarity that, wow, maybe I got to start climbing a different mountain. Maybe you're in the valley and this is articulating where you need to go next. Maybe you're on the second mountain and you've been struggling, right, to let go of the first or clarify where you're going. You guys tell me if this is hitting, this is resonating, because I think this analogy of a first and second mountain is something we all go through. And who knows, maybe there's a third mountain, I don't know. Maybe we'll be walking together live in 20 years, right, on the same day, same time. We're still together and we'll be talking about a third mountain that exists that I'm unaware of right now. Maybe some of you guys are ahead of me and you can enlighten us in the comment thread. But for right now, I'm of the belief that there's two mountains that we all go through. And they do feel different because they are inherently different. And that's normal and that's natural and that's okay. And understanding why they're different allows yourself the grace and the freedom to explore that second mountain and enjoy the climb that you're going on. At least those are my thoughts for today. Check out the view from the top. Beautiful. Look at the ocean, sun. Speaking of mountains, we are at the top. Hey, we're at the top of this one. Hey guys, let me know if today resonated with you. Hey, if there's someone that came to your mind or your heart, someone that's scaling their first mountain in the valley, on their second, looking for why, tag them in the comments, share this to your feed, subscribe, rate, review, appreciate all of that stuff. Set your alerts and your reminders and your notifications. You can get alerted when new episodes go live on Mondays on the podcast. Walk with us on Wednesdays here. In the meantime, here's to wherever you're at, your own journey, whatever mountain you're on, in the pursuit of better as we all progress. Hope your year is off to a rocking start. Look forward to the next time that we walk together. Take care, everybody. Hey guys, one last thing. I'm super excited that this new podcast, Alive by Design, just went live. You see, I designed the show to bring you inspired thoughts and fascinating conversations with the world's most impactful people, to provide transformative principles and practices to help you wake up, move toward your meant to, and feel fully alive. And I'd love for you to help me spread the word now. Simply subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on this platform right now. So if I've ever given you value, please do me this personal favor and go subscribe now. And if you found today's episode helpful in any way, make sure you share this with at least one friend today. You have the power right now to change someone's day. So send them a text message with a link to alivebydesign.com, or simply copy and paste the link right from this podcast platform. Who's one person you know right now that you want to see succeed, that you want to see grow, that you want to see feel more alive? Shoot them a text with your largest takeaway from today and be a light in their day. And if you were referred here by a friend, make sure you shoot them a text back and say thank you. I'd love to hear from you directly on what you got from today's podcast. So if you're up for it, drop by my Instagram @Blake Malin and shoot me a DM.
And as always, thank you for showing up. I'm grateful for you, and I hope our time together today in some small way helped you feel a little more alive. Until next time.